Okay, we've been talking about Plato's theory of the forms, which is that objective, intelligible ideas exist metaphysically in outside of space and time in an ideal world, in a metaphysical world or a empirical world. Okay, and usually everybody in an intro to philosophy class hears about Plato's theory of the cave, which he uses as an allegory, or excuse me, not theory of the cave, allegory of the cave, which he uses as an allegory or an analogy to try to describe in a mythological form what this other world is like and what the philosopher is like who's seeking knowledge of the forms, okay? And so Plato says, imagine prisoners are strapped up in a cave, staring at the wall, and there's a light source behind them, and people are going by with objects, and all the prisoners see since their birth are shadows on the wall, right? And that's what our experience here is like. When we see the sensible world, it's like we're seeing shadows and copies of things, okay? And he says the people behind them carrying the objects or whatever that cast the shadows are the poets and the politicians and the philosophers and the leaders in the world. But then Plato says, what if you were to get free, right? Somehow you were to get free and you were to come out of the cave and see reality as it is, see the sun and see the world in the light. You'd be almost blinded at first, and you'd see objects for what they really were, not just shadows, right? And you'd be sort of enlightened. That's corresponding to the forms. When you in the cave, you're in this world. And he says that's what knowledge of the forms is like. It's like an ascent up into this other world when we actually seek for the idea of love itself, or beauty itself, or truth itself. That's what the philosophers are seeking, knowledge of the forms. Then he says, this philosopher who sees and gets glimpses of the forms will come back down into the cave and try to educate everybody else, but they won't accept him and they'll kill him and they'll crucify him, which is precisely what happened to Plato's mentor, Socrates, which we're going to talk about very soon. But the allegory of the cave is just a story Plato tells to try to give an analogy of what this world is like and what he's trying to get at. Okay, he also talks about it elsewhere in his famous book, The Republic, as going up a line. But the key idea here is that there's a split world where these realities exist. Now you can see why Nietzsche said Christianity is merely Platonism for the people, or Platonism for the masses, Platonism for the non-philosophers, because there you have the split world. You have this world of an ideal, the world of the ideal, and then the world of the sensible and the real, okay? Or the world of appearances and the world of true reality, okay? Oh no, I forgot what I was going to say. There was something else here. Yeah, Christian philosophers, particularly St. Augustine. St. Augustine, you might have read his book in your theology class, or you will, The Confessions. St. Augustine was influenced very heavily by Plato and the Neoplatonists. These are just followers of Plato. And he said, well, these forms, they seem a lot, this world of the forms seems a lot like the divine world. And this world here, the cave, or whatever you want to call it, seems a lot like this world. What are these forms? How do we reconcile this with Christianity? And Augustine said, I know. The forms are just ideas in the mind of God. So mathematical ideas are just the mind of God, right? The truth itself, or beauty itself, or goodness itself, this is somehow a copy or an impression of God's own mind, right? And so this is really what he's saying, is that Plato, that world is the ideal world. This world is just a copy, and the philosopher is seeking knowledge of the forms.